Since 2009, Congressman John Garamendi has served in the U.S. House of Representatives. As a farmer, he has been a consistent voice on water policy and agricultural issues. He also serves on the House Armed Services Committee and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. The Congressman joins us today to bring his perspective on the major issues facing California's 3rd Congressional District, our region, and the nation. Next on Studio Sacramento.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Congressman, what are the most pressing issues facing this nation right now?
There are several. Certainly the continuation of our economic growth, particularly being able to spread that economic growth and the wealth it creates to all Americans. We've seen growth over the years, but it's getting more and more concentrated in the very, very wealthy. That has to be dealt with. Secondly, we have some very serious international issues that require our very careful, thoughtful attention. Obviously, during this period, we're seeing the issue of North Korea, their buildup of their nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missiles, and you've got Russia. Not the Russian investigation with the president, although that's ongoing, but really Russia's expansive issues where they've taken over Crimea, they're into taking over part of Georgia. All of that needs to be dealt with, and climate change. You put all those together, it is a heavy agenda for the United States, and this government, our nation, needs to lead. There really is no one else out there. Obviously, there are some rising powers, China, Russia wants to get back in the game, European Union, but all of these countries and all of the travels, and I've been on the Armed Services Committee many, many places, people rely upon the American leadership.
You recently visited South Korea.
Yes.
Give us a sense of what's going on back there and what the mood is.
The mood is of serious concern. For more than 50 years now, almost 60 years, the American military has been prepared to fight every night, every day, on razor's edge. And the current ramp up of rhetoric between Kim Jong-un, the dictator in North Korea, and our own president raises the level of concern to a very red watch out level. It's possible that a mistake could be made and a conflagration on the Korean Peninsula in which tens of thousands of people would die immediately, including American soldiers and families. And so we need to ramp it down, take a deep breath, keep in mind what Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly. Mr. President, please don't go off the handle as you did with this fire and fury business. Be very calm. Get to the negotiating table. We've had an enormous breakthrough on that with the UN resolution, unanimous. China, Russia, the United States, all together with sanctions, and with China saying to North Korea, ramp it down, don't continue the nuclear, don't continue the ICBMs. And then our president just blows it all.
At the same time, though, publications that are typically more on the progressive side, like the Daily Beast, have recently stated that President Obama's initiative called Strategic Patience with North Korea has been a bust. And so the folks in the administration argue that this fighting fire with fire or stridency with stridency is the only thing that works with a character like Kim Jong-un.
Well, the fire are nuclear weapons. And the fire is artillery shells and missiles raining down on 30 million people in Seoul, South Korea, and 37,000 Americans, including families, that are in that same neighborhood. So be very careful with the fire, because it is deadly fire, and that doesn't include the nuclear side of it. What we need to do is to get to the negotiating tables and recognize that we really have two Koreas. And the desire of Kim Jong-un to maintain his family's reign is we understand that. That's his principal purpose. Is there some way of guaranteeing that short of nuclear weapons in his hands? The answer is yes. That requires negotiations. That requires that China, Russia, the United States, Japan, and others come together, keep the sanctions in place, put the pressure on, and lead to the negotiating table and find a way for Kim Jong-un's principal goal, maintenance of power, to be achieved without a nuclear weapon. And I believe it can be done.
If North Korea launches missiles, even toward a U.S. territory like Guam, do you support a response?
Absolutely, there'd be a response. There'd be a response if they launched artillery shells into Seoul, or missiles into Seoul, or into the American bases. And the result would be the most horrific war since World War I on the Korean Peninsula. You've got the biggest army in the world, American military. You've got the fourth biggest army in the world, North Korea, facing off together with South Korea on the Korean Peninsula. There'd be tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of casualties. We don't need to go there. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is to quiet the rhetoric, go to the negotiating tables with power. Obviously, we have the economic power with the sanctions and the military power, and figure out how to provide North Korea with what it wants. That is regime security, and at the same time, no nuclear weapons.
It's interesting you take that perspective, because President Obama's former arms control negotiator, Gary Samore, he said that he doesn't believe that diplomacy is going to work in this situation.
Well, we haven't had diplomacy with all of the major powers in the area on the same page. It's only recently. In fact, within the last couple of weeks.
You're referring to the UN resolution.
The UN resolution and Congress, with its own sanctions for Russia, North Korea, and Iran. All of those sanctions are now in place. That puts heavy pressure. That wasn't there before. And we have not had China do what they did at the ASEAN meeting in Philippines, saying to North Korea directly, to the foreign minister, don't continue. Don't continue with the missiles. Don't continue with the nuclear weapons. We need to find a different path.
You also have visited Eastern and Central Europe recently. Russia is almost as big a preoccupation as North Korea. What are you finding there?
Well, we're talking about two different Russian issues. There's the investigation of the presidency and the campaign and the Russian involvement. That's aside. I visited Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, and Georgia in a 8-day or 10-day visit, working with our American military that is pushed eastward to provide the deterrence with a very clear message to Russia. You're not going to do any more of what you did in the Ukraine. Those days are over. You're not going to threaten the Baltic states. You're not going to threaten Georgia further. The American government and NATO, not just the American military, but NATO, is on the eastern edge with sufficient military deterrence to tell Russia, your game is over, Putin. You're not going to play that game anymore in this region. That's an important message. And deterrence rather than, again, military conflict. And the message...
What do you think is driving Putin on all of these different fronts to be so aggressive with regards to American interests at this moment?
I believe Putin wants to reestablish the power of the previous Soviet Union. He wants to be the second big dog on the world stage. Well, he's not going to get there with an economy that is like 12th or 15th in the world. He ought to be paying attention to growing his economy rather than trying to expand his physical domain.
And what's kind of slipped off the radar for many people has been our commitment in Afghanistan. Where are we at in terms of finally bringing that mission to a conclusion?
Two different things. First of all, the United States Congress, Senate and House, has to assert their constitutional obligation and authority to declare war. 2001 was the last authorization to use military force, declaration of war, against the Taliban and related entities. That declaration is now being used to wage war in Mali, in the Sahel of Africa.
Which raises a question. Was Barbara Lee right? She was the sole member of Congress who voted against that declaration back in 2001, if I recall correctly.
She was right in one regard. It was an unlimited time frame. I think she was wrong that the United States needed to take action, but certainly that resolution that is now 16 years old is being used to wage war all around the world, and most recently American bombers and drones operating in the Philippines, saying that this is ISIS. It's a different world. We need to revisit this. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we need a plan for Afghanistan. The definition of insanity is to continue doing what you've done and it doesn't work. Well, that's exactly what we're doing in Afghanistan. The President promised us that 4 months ago he would deliver a new plan for Afghanistan. We need that new plan, and then based on that, we need a new authorization to use military force to either agree with that plan or not.
The military's been engaged in so many different fronts on so many different issues. One of the most interesting recent developments has been with regards to the administration taking a position on transgender people serving actively in the military. And it seems like the military has essentially told the president to pound sand. Is that a concern at all that the military is their civilian commander-in-chief?
No, the military is doing exactly what it must do. It must go to the president, or the president must go to the military with a formal order, not a tweet that pops up in the middle of the night without having talked to anybody, creating chaos in the military, dealing with several thousand men and women who are in the military, who are transgender, who are working hard, who are protecting this country, and just creating chaos. This is one more example of where this president has got to get his act together. And the act is, you have to sit down and be thoughtful. You've got to work through these complex issues before you go and tweet, because the tweet creates chaos. And words without thought behind them, as he did with threatening North Korea with fire and fury, creates very serious consequences. And certainly that happened with the military. The military simply says, Mr. President, give us a formal order and we'll carry it out. In the meantime, we're studying this issue as you asked us to do. Please let us finish our study and then we'll deal with whatever needs to be done.
Coming back stateside, you started your comments talking about restoring the economy and getting to prosperity. How are we doing right now?
Well, the economy is coming back and has been coming back since the crash of 2008 and 2009. Every single month, during every one, except for the first 4 months or 5 months of the Obama administration in 2009, January through June, the economy every month since that time has been growing. Not as fast as any of us would like, but let's recognize we came out of a very serious deep hole in which there was enormous disruption to virtually every element of the economy. And now we're seeing good growth continuing in the first 6, 7 months of the Trump administration. That's good. The question is, who's benefiting? Are wages going up? Are the working men and women in America seeing the benefits of a growing economy with higher wages, better opportunities for jobs? And the answer is not really.
Well, that's part of what supposedly fueled President Trump's victory in the fall, was that his pronouncement that he would be better situated to bring back that level of prosperity. Now, the Democrats have recently come out with a new initiative called the Better Deal.
Right.
What's better about it?
What's better about it is where it's focused. It's focused on economic growth for the American families, the working men and women that are out there, usually at mother and father both having a job, or single parent families. That's where the focus is. How do we grow this economy to their benefit so that they have better opportunities, better education, opportunity to change jobs along with the educational technical training to do that, and higher wages along the way. Part of this is my agenda, which I call Make It in America. I've been at that 6 years before Trump ever came up with his Made in America. They're one and the same. We can, for example, working as I am on the ranking member of the Coast Guard Maritime Committee, we can, with 2 paragraphs, rebuild the American shipbuilding and maritime industry by requiring that our energy that we're now exporting, oil and natural gas, be on American-built ships with American sailors. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs in American shipyards and the sailors on the ships.
You represent a district that has a lot of rural aspects to it. And so in some ways, you represent the flyover country that Democrats are accused of not being able to speak to effectively, particularly white working class voters. What if you were in charge of all Democratic operations, what would be the 2 things that you would mandate in order to make sure that the people who think that your party is out of touch with the common American knew that they were really shoulder to shoulder with you?
Well, part of it I just talked about, and that is, what is our focus? If our focus is on the working families of America, rather than on Wall Street, rather on the wealthy, then we will have policies that will make sense. For example, we would not repeal the Affordable Care Act and give massive, massive tax cuts to the super wealthy. And really, that piece of legislation was the largest transfer of wealth from the working men and women and the poor in America to the super wealthy ever in any legislation throughout the history of this country.
You're talking about the repeal efforts.
Exactly, the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. It was not just a repeal, it was a massive tax cut to the super wealthy. So much so that in Trump's cabinet, the benefits were probably in the range of $5 to $10 million a year in lower taxes for him and for his cabinet officials. It was obscene. Now, you modify your tax breaks for small corporations, small businesses, so that the benefit goes to those businesses, to the growing businesses in the community, and make sure that if there's a tax break at all, it goes to the working men and women. The wealthy, frankly, are doing very, very well. They're acquiring a higher and higher percentage of all of the wealth that's created in America. And that's an urban and a rural issue.
You have worked on health care before health care was cool.
That's true, back to the 1970s.
That's right. And virtually there are a few areas of bipartisan agreement. One of them is that Obamacare at a minimum has to be fixed.
Yes.
What is it that where Obamacare falls short, that if there was a bipartisan effort to take place, you think they need to focus on?
Well, first of all, every major piece of legislation is never perfect when it becomes law. And through the passage of time, from the very moment after it becomes law, you begin to realize where the shortcomings are. We've known since 2010, 11, when the Affordable Care Act went into place, that there were things that needed to be done. We needed to make sure that the small businesses, they were being not very well taken care of by the initial law. That needed to be modified. There's the benefits, there's subsidies for those small organizations. We also know that we needed to allow states to have more flexibility in the increased number of people that were brought into the Medicaid program, Medi-Cal in California, so that there would be flexibility, so that the experimentation which occurs at the state and local level could be fulfilled. That needed, in fact, much of that was done. We also needed to eliminate the uncertainties that exist in the insurance market. Would the continued cost sharing, this is the buy down of the cost of insurance, would that be able to be there month after month? Right now, President Trump is creating a crisis in the insurance market by not telling the insurance companies, not telling the consumers whether they will have the subsidy the next month.
As a former insurance commissioner in California, if that uncertainty continues, what's going to be the impact on coverage at the individual level for the working families in your district?
The president has said, let the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, implode. He is causing it to implode by removing the advertising. Every insurance policy, you need advertising. Tell people, come and buy this policy. It's available. Here are the benefits. They cut the money out. The individual subsidies It was the end of July before they released the money for the individual subsidies. That creates chaos in the marketplace. The cost sharing across one insurance company to another, depending upon the risk, that is the number of sick people in one company versus another company, that remains to this day unclear. We call that a guarantee or a reinsurance program. That creates enormous uncertainty in the insurance markets. The insurance companies need to know. They needed to know last month what would be the program going into the next year. Since they don't know, they're coming up with two different costs, a high cost of uncertainty and then the lower cost.
Another major issue where there's a lot of uncertainty is immigration. In terms of, there's everything from the discussion related to the border wall to, in your district, there's a gentleman by the name of Baljit Singh who has been in this country for a number of years. He's undocumented, and he's had to report in to ICE on a periodic basis. Well, recently that changed where he actually was detained at the Rio Consumnes Center. Yeah. What is going on with the issue of how immigration is being applied?
Well, two things coming together simultaneously. First of all, the president that is hell-bent on deporting what appears to be every undocumented person, whether they have ever created a crime or whether they are solid citizens in the community, raising a family, paying their taxes, participating in schools and community. So he's going after everybody with a very comprehensive, tough enforcement. Mr. Singh is but one example of several in my own district. That's one thing. Simultaneously, we have an immigration law that simply doesn't work. The Senate, 4 years ago, passed a comprehensive reform. Speaker Boehner and the Republicans refused in the House of Representatives to even hold a hearing on it. The result is we have today a law that doesn't work, doesn't take into account that we got 10, 12 million undocumented men and women and families in the United States that are unclear what's going to happen. Going to deport them all?
It was my understanding, though, that they were willing to take up the bill, but they wanted border security first and then to deal with reform second. Is it wrong for them to want border security?
That's not the case. The comprehensive bill had border security. It had a way of regularizing those undocumented people, knowing who they are, giving them the proper papers, putting them in the back of the line if they wanted to get citizenship. It also had the electronic verification, e-verification, and it had how to deal with guest workers. It was all there. But the House of Representatives, the Republican leadership, and the Republican Party refused to take it up, and now we have this very chaotic law that doesn't work. So two things have to be done. First of all, I would petition the president to not go after law-abiding, undocumented, obviously they've broken the law to get here, but don't go after and break up these families. I've got a case in Beale Air Force Base in my district of a family that was overseas for years, 17 years marriage. They try to come back. The wife's papers are not in order. She's deported. He's here in the United States with the two young children. And I'm going, that wife served in the military as much as the gentleman did, and yet she's thrown out of the country.
Let's talk a little bit about the other big issue where there seems to be a lack of agreement, and that's climate change. Climate change affects, if you believe in it, affects the entire planet, particularly in California because of our tie to agriculture. Very big issue. What are the ramifications of us pulling out of the Paris Peace Accords or climate accords?
It's a symptom of a larger problem. We have a president and an administration that are in denial. They have alternate facts. The fact is there is no disagreement on climate change about any serious scientist. We do know that the greenhouse gases have seriously increased and will continue to increase, and the climate will get warmer. That's a fact. Where's it coming from? It's coming from industrialization all around the world. That's a fact. Pulling out of the Paris Accord puts America off the table, removes us from the leadership in this nation and in this world, and furthermore, does not give our government the opportunity to modulate, to change, and to put in policies that do not hurt the economy of our nation and the rest of the world. We will grow the economy if we aggressively deal with climate change and move to non-polluting energy systems.
Congressman Garamendi, thank you for your time. Appreciate your visit.
Thank you very much for letting me share this half hour with you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guests and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.